Great, likewise.
All right, greetings from Hyde Park. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome to Cultivating an Entrepreneurial Mindset, Retooling Yourself for the Future. As we wait for folks to join, I will introduce myself before turning it over to our speaker for today. My name is Sam Constance. I work in alumni career development here at the University of Chicago, and our goal is providing resources and tools to help our alumni community grow in your career or upskill for your next opportunity. And that's exactly what we're going to be talking about today with our speaker, Amit. A few quick reminders. All of the attendees will be muted and off camera during this webinar, but we encourage you to engage with this material via questions throughout the session. Amit will be speaking for 20-25 minutes. As he's speaking, please think of any and all questions you have for him, and then we'll have an engaging Q&A right at the end of his lecture. And then we're also going to launch into a quick poll after I introduce Amit, just so we can get to know you all on the audience. But let me first jump in with a quick intro to our featured speaker for today. Amit Sevak is a dynamic go-to source on emerging trends in the future of education and work and what it means for you, for your college, or for your company. He's been a CEO or president of 3 leading global universities, the University of Europe in Spain, INTI University in Malaysia, and UNITEC in Mexico, and he just gets what higher education's needs are. He's also worked extensively with Fortune 500 companies and human resources teams at Oracle, DeVry, and Bain. So he really just gets, to what companies' evolving workforce needs are. Based in DC, and he sits on numerous boards. And as a graduate of the University of Chicago and Harvard Business School, we are excited to welcome him today. So Amit, thank you so much for joining. Let me know when you want to launch the poll, and I will turn it right over to you.
Sounds good, Sam. I'll leave it in your good hands whenever you'd like to release the different poll questions. So thank you very much for that kind intro. It's great to connect with fellow Maroons. It's great to connect with fellow University of Chicago grads. I'm a super proud graduate of the University of Chicago. I had both of my 2 younger brothers also go to U of C. I've been hiring folks from U of C for our company, Mindset Global, so I'm a big, big fan, and just want to say congratulations to everyone who is now a part of the University of Chicago family. Today's talk is called Cultivating an Entrepreneurial Mindset, Retooling Yourself for the Future. And so I'll just jump right in. It'll take about 20-25 minutes to go through some of these prepared remarks. And then after that, let's open it up for a Q&A. And feel free to fill out the poll questions as they come up. So this talk is all about developing an entrepreneurial mindset. But what is entrepreneurship anyway? Is it mainly about the money? Sweet talking investors? Is entrepreneurship the sole preserve of billionaire teenagers skateboarding around their offices? I certainly hope not. There's one definition that I personally find compelling, that entrepreneurship is the art of transforming risk into opportunity. For the sake of argument, let's accept that definition. Again, entrepreneurship is the art of transforming risk into opportunity. If that is the case, I'd argue that an entrepreneurial mindset is, at least in this context of a developed world, in the 21st century, our #1 survival skill. Now, that may sound like a bold claim, especially for someone like me who's been in education and technology for the past 20 years. But why do I say that? I say that because the world of work is becoming riskier by the day. The average job tenure in the United States is around 4 years and falling. Traditional full-time permanent jobs are being replaced by contract and gig work. The average half-life of any given workplace skill is set to be about 5 years and shrinking. And for tech skills, it is half of that, just 2.5 years. So what that means is that whatever you learn today, at least half of it will be useless by 2027. And if it's a tech-related skill, even sooner. So we face a future in which our jobs, even our basic employability, can't be taken for granted. So there's a lot of risk in that for us as individuals and for us as a society. To stay in work, while also keeping our skills sharp. In other words, to survive, we must learn to transform these risks into opportunities. Let's put it another way. We all need to become entrepreneurs, or at least have an entrepreneurial mindset with ourselves as the product. Now, we already know that entrepreneurship is good for more than just making money. On my podcast, I've been interviewing a number of social entrepreneurs, people who've taken the techniques of entrepreneurship and applying them to achieve far beyond the bottom line. One of them, Marcus Castaigne, uses his MBA training to help kids with ADHD access schooling, healthcare, and other supports. Another, Ronit Avni, moved from human rights advocacy to helping talented young people from developing countries access careers in tech. Another, Dr. Kate Tolenko, uses entrepreneurial principles to strengthen medical education throughout the world. There are endless possibilities of how the entrepreneurial mindset can do great things for society. So, what are the building blocks of an entrepreneurial mindset? I'd like to propose today 7 core skills. Now, to illustrate them, I'd like to tell the story of my own launch of an entrepreneur, as an entrepreneur. Now, spoiler alert, it's not a pretty story. What I'm about to share are really honest, authentic examples of mistakes I made along the way. But I wanted to do this because I thought this would be a good opportunity in this context of the University of Chicago alumni discussion to really share, what can be lessons learned and how to build and strengthen an entrepreneurial mindset. So let me first start with a little bit of a backstory. In a nutshell, my big idea was to help American universities offer education online in emerging markets like Mexico and India. So you can imagine a US university like the University of Chicago or other universities taking some certificate courses and even some degrees and launching them, offering them outside of their home country. Now, this was pre-pandemic that this idea had occurred to me. Now, these are markets that are well known to me. My family's from India. I was born and raised in Chicago, but my parents came from India to Chicago. My wife's family is from Mexico. You could say I was born to do this kind of thing. At least that's what I told the investors. After just a few months' work, I got into talks on a strategic joint venture with 2 potential partners. One of these was a very big, prestigious venture capital firm in the education sector. The other was one of the largest American universities by enrollment. Together, they offered me, at the time that I presented my business plan for this vision, they offered me $4 million of an investment for a 40% stake in the company. In other words, they were telling me that my little company, not much more than a business plan, was worth $10 million. No website, no product, no service. It was me and a couple of folks that we had this vision. And as a guy who worked in the larger organizational context and was becoming an entrepreneur for the first time, this was a pretty big deal. I should probably have taken this as a compliment, but instead I flipped out. You see, in addition to 2/5 of the company going to the investors, the partners also wanted veto rights. This included the right to vote down the budget and to actually fire me, the CEO. If they wanted to do that, they could, and they could show me the door of my own company. I got really concerned. Now, looking back, it doesn't seem like such a big deal. After all, these were big league partners and they were prepared to make a big league investment. But I reacted emotionally. I allowed myself to be offended, even hurt. I couldn't stand the thought of them, the investors, having that kind of power over me, the founder. That was why I left corporate America, after all. That was why I left working for large education organizations, to be my own boss, to stick it to the man. So in short, I blew up the deal. I said this wasn't going to work for me, and that was that. 6 months of work had gone into these discussions with these 2 investors. Again, a leading venture capital firm and a leading university. My would-be partners were upset. My reputation, I thought, was even in jeopardy. And my own team thought I was just completely smoking crack. It really wasn't my finest hour. But it turns out that it was baptism by fire. It set me thinking, what are really the right skills to be an entrepreneur? So that's the context. What I'd like to do is I'd like to propose 7 specific skills that during that experience and then in the subsequent years, I've started to really develop as our company Mindset Global works with dozens and dozens of education entrepreneurs throughout the world. Number 1, inner knowledge. Number 2, imagination. Number 3, negotiation. Number 4, values. Number 5, empathy. Number 6, switching off. And number 7, team building. I call these 7 skills I invest, because that's what we all need to do them. And because let's face it, everybody needs a mnemonic device. So there we go, the 7 skills I invest. Let's start with skill 1, inner knowledge. Now, I'm going to be a little geeked out here, speaking to fellow University of Chicago grads, where the famous core curriculum, the great books, became a foundation for University of Chicago and many other liberal arts schools. Let me start with something Greek. Know thyself, as the Delphic oracle said. True self-knowledge requires knowing your strengths and your weaknesses. In the example that I shared, I should have known mine. When the stakes are high, I have trouble staying objective. That's my kryptonite. I can get emotional. I don't think straight. I'm really good at selling, good at operating, good at building a team, good at financial analysis, good at motivating the troops. But when I'm in a negotiation like this and there's high stakes involved, sometimes, even though being emotional can be a strength for team building and for selling, it can also be a hindrance if I'm not being really taking a step back and being objective. I should have been more objective about my own self. If I had been, I could have taken steps to turn them into strengths. Work with a partner, work with people I trust who do financial negotiation for a living. Self-knowledge, that is skill 1. So ask yourself, as you're thinking about acquiring an entrepreneurial mindset, what am I good at? What do I need to work on? What could I use help with? Who can I reach out to for help? What relationships can I cultivate to complement? We'll circle back to this last point on who and what could you use help with at the end of this list. Skill 2 is imagination. Imagination. With anything as complex as a business, any entrepreneur knows that sooner or later, something has to give. You see, an entrepreneur is not just a risk taker, there is also an element of calculation, of thinking about the short term and the long term. Andy Grove, the founder of Intel, the chip company, wrote a book that has had a big impact on me. The title speaks for itself. Only the paranoid survive. Only the paranoid survive. As an entrepreneur in any fast-moving business, which today is pretty much any business, only those who can imagine the pitfalls will make it. I believe the same applies to a career. On a personal level, what are the political risks, the talent risks, the market risks, the personal risks? What customer risks am I taking? What reputational risks to the organization? And what are the opportunities in each of these areas? So let's use our imagination. Visualize the future. If I'm making a decision, there's a left road or there's a right road. Getting familiar and really thinking through options, taking inventory of possibilities, plotting it out, writing it out. Sometimes we like to do too much in our head, but actually putting it down on paper helps us imagine and really plan out different scenarios. Whatever helps you to imagine the road ahead is what I want to really encourage. Give the space needed and exercise that imagination. If it's going out in nature, if it's being by yourself, or if it's talking it through with friends. I really like to use a couple of metaphors for me personally. One is going to the balcony. Imagine yourself going to the balcony. Allows you to think more clearly, opens it up, especially in a contained space, and helps you breathe in possibilities. Another is seeing myself on a mountain looking down onto a valley. Standing above and outside a problem helps me map it out and think through all the twists and turns. So, skill one, imagination. Skill two, imagination. Skill three is actually something much more visceral. Skill three is needs, meaning yours. As an entrepreneur, you're running a business, not a church. And as a person with an entrepreneurial mindset, there are moments when you just have to be, I hate to use the word, but it's true, a little bit ruthless, a little bit calculative. And I mean that in the spirit of really taking responsibility and ownership. Now I'm going to use an extreme example, partly for just illustrating the point. For those of you that have watched the original movie, Gordon Gekko, you might remember the original movie, Wall Street, you might remember Gordon Gekko. He had a famous quote, "Greed is, for want of a better word, good." I would just add in parentheses, within reason, but the point still stands. A slightly nicer way of putting this might be to quote the airline safety card: "Secure your own oxygen mask before helping others." Why? Because without oxygen, you are unlikely to be of much assistance. When I was a kid, my father gave me a book called Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. It was ironic, really, because my dad was the poor dad. My dad founded a half a dozen businesses, but he still had a salaryman's view of making money. You do the work, you take your take home pay at the end of the month. And so, unfortunately, many of his ventures flopped. Now, my rich dad was my uncle. He was a property maven. He once said to me, "Amit, when you think you make money in real estate is when." And I'm not sure how this comes up in a conversation with pre-theme, but here we are. I said, "Well, when you sell the property, isn't that when you make money?" He said, "No, when you buy it, when you establish the price and you establish your share." This is an important lesson in entrepreneurship. How do you make money? You get equity in companies at the beginning that are going to grow. That's the rich dad approach. Once in a while, indulging in your inner Gordon Gekko, focusing on your bottom line, understanding what your boundaries are. So is your current employer doing well in your case? Will it continue to do so? And if not, make plans to explore options. Get a new project, a new contract, a new gig. And when you do, negotiate hard. Get the best deal you can. That's the skill. But having said that, which is the skill in skill three of understanding your needs, let's now go to skill four. And skill four is in some ways skill three's much nicer twin brother or twin sister. Skill four is about values. Entrepreneurship is not for the faint of heart, and it's definitely not for the lethargic. It's a manic lifestyle. You're doing everything all the time, constantly pivoting from pitching to budgeting to personnel to selling and on and on. And sometimes you need an anchor. As Simon Sinek puts it, start with the why. What's your why? Figure out the handful of values that drive you in your career. Think about it. It might sound a little corny, but write them down. For me, personally, mine are the 3 E's. Education. I love education. It changes people's lives. The earth. Everything is going global. And increasingly, the precious resources that we have on this planet and our sustainability on this planet make me every day think a little bit more about what we can do to support us on a global stage. And 3, enterprise. Startups are going to drive the future, and having that entrepreneurial mindset, whether you're in a startup, a small company, or whether you're in a large organization, even the government. So having that enterprising spirit. So these are my 3 values: education, the earth, and enterprise. I call them the 3 E's, and it provides me a little bit of a compass as I think through decisions personally and professionally. I should maybe have that on a tattoo or a t-shirt. As I said before, there are not very many people that have really figured out their weaknesses and been truly honest with themselves in my experience. And that applied to me as well. Not very many people go through this process similarly of figuring out their core values and trying to put it in a very simple way that they can understand. But trust me, it's really worth it to have this entrepreneurial mindset. It's a great compass for professional and personal aspects. After my debacle early in my career as an entrepreneur, what helped me get back on track was reconnecting with the good I was trying to do in the world, reminding myself that I wanted to democratize education, harness technology for social impact, bring the opportunities I had as an American to other countries. I put up a picture of Gandhi in my office. That might sound cliche, but I chose him deliberately. Gandhi literally symbolized his principles of simplicity and by living the life of an ascetic. That visceral connection with his value system allowed me to become probably much more grounded and enabled him in some ways to become one of the great public entrepreneurs of the 20th century. So talk about turning risk into opportunity. If I believe in 3 E's, the education, the earth, and entrepreneurs, or being enterprising, I should be living by those. And linking back to our going to the balcony, the 3 E's are the handrail on that balcony. They help me keep steady. The values are super important. What are those personal values as an entrepreneur or someone having an entrepreneurial mindset? Once again, an entrepreneur must wear many hats, or better, have many brains. And so in some sense, you have to be both Gandhi and Gecko rolled into one. Skill 5 is empathy. Now in skill 1, we looked inside ourselves. Remember that, know thyself? But the next skill is about outward looking, empathy. To paraphrase those great Swedish philosophers, the band ABBA, the flip side of knowing me is knowing you. Entrepreneurs must ask a lot of people for a lot of things. Work for me, buy my product, fund my business. Fundamentally, they're asking others to buy into their idea. And in the wider entrepreneurial mindset we're discussing today, that idea is you. To be successful, you have to see things from their point of view, have empathy. In my case, I was asking my potential partners for something too big, to put their faith in me and their money in my business. They were prepared to commit a lot of money to a first-time entrepreneur. Naturally, they wanted something in return, some safeguards, some reasonable protections. I should have understood that more. Instead, I went ahead and compounded my mistake. I went to the university and asked if we should just do the partnership without the VC. I thought I could maybe get more favorable deal terms. That was, not to put a too fine a point on it, but kind of dumb. These 2 organizations were already in a partnership. I knew about that arrangement, but I didn't fully comprehend it. Not only that, these 2 principals knew each other well. To me, it looked like I was trying to do the right thing to try to protect my team, but to them, it looked like I was trying to cut a deal and to cut out the powerful investor. Again, if I took the time and slowed things down and had a bit of empathy, a bit of understanding of the other person's point of view, I could have saved me from myself. So empathy, in other words, seeing the world from another person's point of view, is a critical skill in having an entrepreneurial mindset. Skill 6, switching off. In the entrepreneurial mindset, the buck stops with you as the leader or as part of a leadership team. To get anything done, we have to focus, focus, focus. But we can't do that forever because we're not robots. At some point, we need to stop focusing. And in fact, we just need to stop, period. When my nightmare with the venture capital firm happened, it was the depths of winter. We just moved back from Singapore to the States, living on the East Coast. And frankly, in Singapore, winter doesn't exist, which looking back now was a bummer. On the other hand, that meant it was the holidays. I could escape for a bit. And it really helped for me that we were able to spend some time with my wife's family in Mexico. I took that opportunity to switch off. I took a step back. I thought a lot about things without allowing deadlines and daily calls and back-to-back meetings to press on me. That was when I recalibrated the whole business. I started again from the first principles. What did I know? I knew the market. I knew how to sell. Whom did I know? Well, I had a Rolodex. So the best use for me at that particular moment was to go out and pitch people on our vision. And that's what I did. And it turned the business around. People think of entrepreneurs as constantly on the go or moving in a linear fashion, but the best ones take time off. Even at the height of building Microsoft, Bill Gates would take a week off every quarter. Steve Jobs would regularly meditate. As we speak, I just got back from a week-long retreat. It was the first time I've taken so much time away. I did so deliberately because I have some big decisions that I'm about to make. And again, I've come back with clarity, partly just by switching off the phone for an entire week. But you don't have to go south of the border or have some fancy retreat. As I mentioned, Steve Jobs would decompress on a daily basis just by meditating for a few minutes to get him regrounded. So be like Steve. Carve out some space and time to regroup and think things through. More about meditation soon. Skill 7 is team building. In the corporate world, when a complex transaction comes up, I would often pass it to a CFO. Nerds love that kind of thing. And I'm speaking as a University of Chicago nerd. But as an entrepreneur, you can't pass it off like that because there just isn't anybody else. The buck stops with you. You have to own the decision. And again, I want to emphasize this is not just for starting your own company, but even having an entrepreneurial mindset as a team member of an organization, because this mindset is a survival skill even in small, medium, or larger organizations, whether they're for-profit or nonprofit, and frankly, even the government. The buck increasingly stops with you because the world, bosses, investors, board members, are expecting us all to increasingly take that accountability or have that entrepreneurial mindset. So expect that you have to own the decision and be accountable for it. But that doesn't mean that you can't ask for help. If I had just sat down, back to my story, and talked to a couple of friends who were lawyers, or talked to someone who I knew in the venture capital world, or really talked to anyone with experience in complex investor negotiations, if I had done any of those things, if I'd taken some time, I could have seen a way through and gotten my funding. This is where a group of mentors or an informal personal advisory board really comes into its own. A recent guest on my podcast, How'd You Learn That?, calls this concept a personal board of directors. Try it. Imagine it. Gather a committee of 3 or 4 trusted advisors. They can be friends or professional advisors who you know well. Get them together. Maybe people who you know from different areas of life, from work, from hobbies, from family, and so on. Consult them liberally on the big decisions. Talk to them one-on-one or in small groups. Offer to have them serve on your board or to maybe be involved in helping them out in some of their activities. And be ready to both give advice and receive advice. You will help them out and get insight on their way of thinking too. Their objective activity, that kitchen cabinet, the personal board of directors, will let you take that step back and see the big picture. Let me wrap up here with a takeaway on meditation. There's no switch you can flip or a pill you can pop to give yourself all these skills. But there is one tool I know can help, and it's about the least businessy thing I can imagine. It's meditation. Think about those 7 skills that I just mentioned. I invest, inner knowledge, imagination, needs, values, empathy, switching off, and team building. The 7 skills of an entrepreneurial mindset. I invest. What unites all of these? What really unites all of these is that each of them fundamentally is about developing your own insights. This is the purpose of meditation, in my view. It's not magic, it's not religion, it's just our wiring. Specifically, it's about how our brain is wired. People think meditation is about relaxing, perhaps a part of it, but for me, it really isn't, because you can be active in the process. Fundamentally, it's about thinking without judgment and without preoccupation. It's allowing your mind to focus. All 7 of the skills at their most basic level require this one ability to function. Here's an exercise you can do at any time. Close your eyes. Actually, maybe don't do this while you're driving, but step 1, pull over. Then close your eyes and center your thoughts on one thing. For many people, it's the feeling of breath moving in and out of your body. Really zoom in and lose yourself in that one feeling. From there, you can begin to let other thoughts come and go. You can hold them in your mind without getting emotional, without getting overwhelmed. Try it with skill 1, the one on inner knowledge. Meditate on one of your big weaknesses, one of the big areas of development for you. Perhaps it's your biggest fear, or it's a fear of failure. The people who annoy you the most, maybe that's another one. Things that are triggers for you from what other people say. These are things that usually set us off emotionally. We're all human, but meditation is like a superpower, and it allows you to take an opportunity to stand outside of yourself, to pose as an objective observer on your life, to analyze situations as if you were not so invested in them, financially, emotionally, or personally. You can start to think about entrepreneurship as a practice like any other. Just as a tennis player works constantly on their forehand or their backhand or their serve or their net game and so on, you can take individual aspects of your practice and fine-tune them. Take yourself to the next level, skill by skill. But it all starts with the insight. I hope this talk was helpful and has given you a framework for developing an entrepreneurial mindset. I'd love to now open it up, Sam, for questions.
That's great. Thank you so much for sharing your insights and your tips with us today. We do have a few questions that have come through already, and I'll encourage anyone else on the line to submit your questions via the chat or the Q&A function on Zoom. But I'll start here with the first one. Amit, how do you know what is reasonable in terms of a deal that what kind of a reasonable deal in terms of the amount of control that you would be willing to give away? What kind of parameters do you consider when exploring a deal like the one that you referenced at the beginning of your lecture?
That's a great question, Sam. Thank you for the question. I'll be giving the classic answer, which is it depends on the deal. But in principle, or early on as an entrepreneur, in the corporate context, in the for-profit or business context, when you're raising capital, you're still looking to preserve as much equity as you can for yourself, for your founding team, and also for other team members that you bring on later on. That's often put into an ESOP pool, a stock option pool. And so early on, in the early days, when you're first raising capital, you're typically raising what's called a seed round. And in that moment, if you imagine you've got 100% of equity at the very beginning of any new venture, right? It's just you, so you own 100%, or you and your founders own 100%. And if you are giving up 5 or 10% of equity by bringing on initial investors, that's reasonable. Sometimes you could do even a little bit more than 10%, because you want to preserve and think about each round as somewhere in that 5 to 10% range. Because as the company starts to get traction, you're raising more capital. So if you imagine each round you're giving up 5 or 10%, by the time you're in 3 or 4 rounds in, you might have given up 20 to 30% of the equity, but you've still preserved for providing incentives and really for motivating you and for your team in that 60, 70% round after you've done a few rounds. And again, it depends. If some companies require more capital and you might end up diluting more, others might have different contexts there. But typically, I'd like to target some range of 5 to 10% early on when I'm trying to raise. So that's why that example, when they were saying, "Hey, we want to, give you quite a bit of money, and we're willing to have all these credentials. I also had some pause there on the amount of equity that they were looking to have. 40% is a pretty rich number to offer up early on.
Thanks. And then here's our next question. I would say about 62% of our attendees responded to the poll saying that they would not yet consider themselves an entrepreneur. So here's a question for those 62%. If the entrepreneurial mindset doesn't necessarily come naturally to you, what are some baby steps that you might take to develop them more? This question, this alum who asked the question says she's in UCG and hasn't yet been accustomed to taking a lot of risks in an entrepreneurial sense.
Yeah, no, it's an awesome reflection. I think some of the baby steps would be starting with meditation. And I know that is something that's more thought of oftentimes in the wellness bucket, right? Or in the bucket of, personal health, mental health. But to me, I'm really a big believer that being able to focus on one thing is actually an important skill in life, whether you're an entrepreneur or thinking about being an entrepreneur or not really in that mindset, because what it provides you is the ability to really focus in and develop insights about yourself. In so many ways in the world that we're moving into, there is an increasing need to take accountability for your own decisions, and the opportunity to take a step back, to reflect, and to form your own perspectives on things. A lot of times we all live in our heads so much, but the actual decisions that matter in life are really largely connected to your emotions and to your gut, right? And I'm literally using here on the visual this idea that a lot of the way we think about these big decisions, whether you're in a business or personal context, are really not actually here. They're really more down in your heart and down in your gut. And I think the ability to take a step back and kind of see it in an integrated whole. So that would be one baby step, a 10, 15-minute meditation, and forgive yourself because we all get busy and we miss it sometimes. But to take that as a practice, just as important as brushing your teeth, just as important as other things you do, I think is super important. The other couple of baby steps I'd offer in terms of entrepreneurial mindset is, taking the time to really self-assess what skills you have that are strong and that you're proud of and that you want to really cultivate and show. But then what are those one or two things that might be barriers to helping you really take off with those strengths? Because we're all a mixed bag of skills, things we're good at, things we're, not so good at. And then there's things in the middle where if we can just tweak them a little bit and make them from something we're so on to something a little better. Like for me in that example, I said, look, I'm really good at selling. I'm really good at presenting, at convincing, but financial negotiation, particularly complex ones, is one I need to develop a little bit more strength on and really do the homework on those. So having that self-assessment on skill sets and then identifying areas to nudge, right? So that when an opportunity comes up, you're ready to engage in that.
Thank you. And can I say, I really appreciate it. I mean, I've hosted and sat in on a lot of these conversations about entrepreneurship and upskilling, and that focus on mental health and wellness, I think, is not something that you hear a lot. So I really appreciate meditation being the first answer in these baby steps before we really think beyond that. Here's another question from Christine about skill development. She asks, how does professional skill development fit into your iInvest framework?
Professional skill development. Oh, that's great. So in the framework, there are a couple of places where it can fit in. I think in one way to think about it, whoops, I just lost you there. One way to think about it is, in the know thyself bucket. Let's see if I can get this back on here. There we go. I'm on a new I'm on a new iPad, and I'm learning how to apply my skills from the desktop version to the iPad version. So I think know thyself is an important one. It's really reflecting on what it is. It's actually amazing. So much of the education world, the world that I'm in ed tech, focuses on what skills you need. So if you are interested in becoming a computer programmer or interested in a tech job and you don't have the tech skills, go learn XYZ, go get a certificate, right? The companies, the vendors are all promoting the skill you need. But the big reflection from my point of view is the self-assessment, is actually getting that baseline, right? You know, it's if you want to get into a program for fitness, you want to first have a baseline of where are you at? You know, what are the key metrics that you're tracking? If you're looking to do that in other aspects of life, you start with a baseline. And so my view is that in terms of personal skill development, what's that inventory of what are the areas where I'm strong in? What are the areas that I'm weak in? And here's the big secret of this one. I know it's corny. I know it's really corny. But if you did a equivalent of a personal 360 feedback loop, the companies do it all the time. You know, when I was running these education companies in the past overseas, you know, regularly our human resources folks would send out an annual 360. I didn't really like it. I didn't really like getting feedback from my bosses, my peers, the folks that were on my team. But, you know, I got feedback, you know, hey, Amit's great in these things and Amit sucks in these things. but you get really honest feedback, and it's a gift. It's actually a gift, because for someone to take time to give feedback, which is for themselves often taking a risk, it actually gives you a perspective that you may not see. We all have blind spots. We all do. We're all human. And so having that 360 feedback approach, and you know, I've seen people do it in an email, just survey monkey it out and send out a questionnaire and say, hey guys, I'm just doing some reflection and here's an idea. I'd like to ask you these 10 questions, and what are my strengths? What are my areas of development? What would you suggest I work on? What do you think are my blind spots? You know, how do I come across in crisis situations? Those kinds of questions that will just elicit fascinating responses. And I think you'll learn something.
I think that's a great suggestion. Having received 360 feedback and given it to folks, I think it's a really, really great self-assessment tool and would echo your recommendation. One last question that I have here, and maybe this is after that self-assessment phase, your note at the beginning of the lecture about the half-life of skills, especially tech skills, this one says is a little bit disconcerting. Any insights into what tech tools or skills I can start working on now that will be most valuable in the next decade?
It is something that's disconcerting for all of us. You know, I want to use a framework that I really like. In the last century, in the 20th century, particularly after World War II, in the US, in Europe, and in many markets around the world, there was this notion of learn and then earn. It's sometimes known as the 4+40 model, where you spend 4 years in college learning, and then you spend 40 years earning, right? You learn and then you earn. And really what's the 21st century economy bringing us, particularly with all the globalization and all the technology, is really a learn, earn, learn, earn, learn, earn model, where you're learning something and then you're earning something for that learning, and then you're learning something and earning it. So instead of a learn and earn, it's a learn, earn thing. And so that's why this timing is so important. It's so important. And particularly for those of you that are not in technology, because most of us, frankly, are not in software programming, right? Or really hard coding activities, or even low code activities, where we're doing a little bit of coding. Most of us are not. And so for those of us that are on the non-tech side, but are working in a digital world, just knowing that your skills have that short time frame of only 5 years of a half-life means that there's a real sense of urgency to be very clear with what am I good at, what do I need to work on, and where am I going. And it may sound a little stressful because it's not something we're necessarily wired to be constantly doing that reflection. Again, where meditation comes in, again, where 360s come in. But that can really be a phenomenal baseline. So it is disconcerting as a fact, but the opportunity is that if you can really master this art of self-assessment, identifying those areas, recognizing I've got about a 5 year, sometimes a 2.5 to 5 year life to my current skills. I mean, me, Amit, right now, sitting here in March of 2022, whatever portfolio of skills I've got, most of them won't be useful in 5 years. Think about that for a minute. Think about that. And so that's the opportunity, like just confronting that reality and then knowing, okay, that's my truth. That's our truth. And therefore, I'm going to then prepare myself. On the specific question of tech skills, There's a lot out there. I would break tech skill certifications into 3 buckets. There's high code, there's low code, and there's no code. And most of the skills are in the no code area, where I'm learning something technical, but I don't have to code. I don't have to actually write code. And that examples are things like learning Salesforce.com, the leading customer relationship management software, or learning a business analytics tool, or learning how to administer a human resources tool or an ERP tool, where you don't actually have to do the software, but you really have to master and know all the features. It's like all of us that have a smartphone. I mean, we use such a small percentage of it. So if you are a super user and can really master a software offering without coding, that's still an important power. And I would focus, for those of us that are not coders, much of our time on thinking, what are those 2-3 tools that I might want to conquer? If I'm really into marketing, probably maybe a Marketo or a HubSpot or a Salesforce marketing. If I'm into finance, maybe some of the financial planning tools that are out there, the Cognos, the other analytics tools. If I'm really into film and editing, there's all kinds of creative platforms. So owning the responsibility of mastering, at least at a reasonable functional level of proficiency, that tool is an incredible superpower. It's not something just for resumes, it's actually something you know. And then from that baseline, you build up that skill and are constantly doing your updating every 2.5 to 5 years. So that's in the no code category. And then in low code and high code, I would invite you to look at languages. I'd invite you to look at different kinds of evolution. Artificial intelligence, machine learning are really driving cybersecurity, a ton of things in InfoSec, information security, Bitcoin, blockchain. So depending on the areas, there's a lot of different tools that are out there, and there's just a gazillion platforms. I'd invite you to also look at free platforms. There's just a ton of offerings where you can get free online courses, self-paced courses with video instructors that allow you to get the fundamentals. And then if you think you've got a basics or at least an interest in something, you can then go sign up for a coding boot camp. There's about 35 coding boot camps in the country today, like the General Assemblies and the Galvanize, the Full Stack Academies, or you can go into some of the non-coding boot camps. I like boot camps because you get, in an 8 or 10 week period, a real intensive investment in your time. So there's a lot of offerings out there. In fact, there are too many in my view, but I think the good news is, again, starting with yourself, having a baseline, and then deciding if you want to go more the low code, no code route, or something a little bit more high code.
And speaking to just some of those offerings to contribute to that upskilling and that continuation of the learning, that earning cycle. One of our alums here on the line asked about MOOCs, the massive online open courses. Do you know about that as a learning tool? Do you know if it's proved effective?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So MOOCs or MOOCs are massive open online courses. And there are a variety of platforms that provide these. The first wave of MOOCs came out in the first part of the last decade with the advent of Coursera, Udacity, Udemy, and a host of other platforms. So you can go onto the websites, log in, it's set up, and then you basically have an opportunity to choose from all different kinds of courses. The platforms, some of them are curated, like in the case of Coursera, where they work with universities and identify professors to talk about certain topics and then load those courses onto their platform. Other are more marketplaces where they're not filtered by the platform, but where folks can throw in courses onto the platform. And my reflection is that right now, today, the amazing thing about these MOOCs is that they're really global. So it's an amazing way to get introductory exposure to new forms of learning by experts or people that have a self-identification as an expert. And so that is exceptional, that you can get an expert from somewhere in the other part of the world that can talk to you and actually train you on some things in a structured way, with a syllabus, typically with weekly videos, et cetera, et cetera. MOOCs are typically self-paced. They're typically, though not always, video-based. So that means is that there's not a teacher, there's not a live instructor that you're working with, at least for the basic MOOC courses, because they're most massive open online courses. They're typically free or very low cost. So the good news is if you're looking for, as a hobbyist, you just want to learn something at a high level or curiosity, they're great. If you want to really develop that next level of skills, MOOCs typically, at least in their MOOC platform courses, don't quite provide the level of rigor academically. You're not getting those levels of rigor on the assessments, on the tests, like with the quizzes and the tests, and you don't have a teacher. And I may be a little old-fashioned, and maybe because I had such great professors, Sam, at University of Chicago, I got spoiled, that having the interaction with a teacher, either via lectures or via threaded discussions in the online format, or just to check in on you, is just something magical and extremely valuable when you're trying to get to that next level of skill set, just like we all had back in school, in K-12 school. So I think MOOCs provide a opportunity for entry-level knowledge. They're not quite there yet for that next level of rigor. Now, having said that, there are MOOC platforms like Coursera that are offering online certificates or even a full online degree. If you go onto Coursera, you can see online master's programs from really incredible universities like the University of Illinois at Chicago, down in Urbana-Champaign, which is not too far from Chicago. And they provide a full online master's, very affordable, in things like an MBA or a master's in accountancy. I mean, that's what the University of Illinois is providing on Coursera. So the MOOCs are evolving. The typical retention rate, meaning the completion rate for a typical MOOC course, is only 5%. So that's something to just bear in mind, that most of them don't actually have that same learning outcome that you would expect in a degree program. So just something to reflect on. But in general, I'm a big fan of them for entry-level understanding.
Wonderful. Well, this has been such a fantastic session. Thank you so much for sharing your time and your insights. And thank you to our attendees. Give yourselves a little pat on the back. You spent an hour today growing and learning in preparation for what comes next. Amit, we'll look forward to welcoming you back in the future, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Sam. It's been a pleasure. It's so great to talk to fellow University of Chicagoers. Go Maroons. And thanks again for the opportunity to chat with you today. Take care.
Go Maroons. Take care.